Good evening, everyone. Good early afternoon. I'm so delighted to see such a wonderful crowd with us today on this almost rainy day in Aspen, so thank you very much for joining us. My name is Peggy Clark. I'm Vice President of Policy Programs here at the Institute and head of Aspen Global Innovators Group. And we're delighted to welcome you for the 5th annual Madeleine K. Albright Global Development Lecture. And we are so pleased this year to be honoring Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from Nigeria, who is a very dear friend who will be giving us some remarks of her perspective on global development. And 5 years ago, we founded the Madeleine K. Albright Global Development Lecture to honor Secretary Albright's contributions to world peace and progress and to shine a light on other leaders worldwide who are answering the call with innovative breakthrough strategies to widen access to health and prosperity for everyone in the world. In fact, that's the mission of the Aspen Global Innovators Group, which I lead. We are dedicated to working with people at the margins of health and prosperity. Perfect timing. I would like to give my special thanks to Dick Blum, who's just walked into the room. Thank you, Dick. Dick Blum, together with Strobe Talbot at the Brookings Institute, and Homie. Homie, are you in the room? Homie Chorus? Homie's right there. Thank you, Homie. Have been for a number of years leading a wonderful Brookings Blum Roundtable on global development, and we're really honored, Dick and Homie, to call you partners and to do this work together. And every year we spend some time thinking and vetting who our honoree will be. And suffice to say that we were overjoyed, and Brookings was overjoyed to join us in honoring you, Ngozi. So, like Brookings, the Aspen Institute has a long history of working on global issues, from our Middle East investment work to the Aspen Strategy Group and many other issues. And today's event will really look at development and diplomacy, which is an area that Ngozi is perfectly positioned to help us with. In previous years, we've honored a number of exceptional global leaders. A few are with us tonight. The Honorable Mary Robinson. Mary, where are you? There you are. Stand up. And we've honored Paul Farmer, the head of Partners in Health, and the Honorable Helen Clark of UNDP. And it's my very special pleasure tonight to have our very first Madeleine K. Albright Global Development Awardee, Rajiv Shah, to come and join me on the podium and introduce Madeleine Albright. As many of you know, Raj Shah served as the leader of USAID under President Obama, where he led a number of very significant innovations and really brought a whole breath of fresh air. And it was at the very beginning of that tenure, which was several years ago. And we're all delighted right now that Raj has just assumed the leadership of the Rockefeller Foundation. So Raj, we're really honored to have you with us tonight. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to get to introduce the woman for whom this lecture is named. 5 years ago today, I had the honor of giving the inaugural Madeleine K. Albright Lecture. And as you would imagine from the title, I was quite nervous about it. So I spent a lot of time preparing a substantive and long discussion about elevating development in American leadership and America's values around the world. My task today is easier and more fun, so I look forward to it. When I thanked Secretary Albright for the opportunity to speak here during that lecture, I noted and thanked her for having stared down dictators, brought an end to war, empowered women everywhere, and taught us all about the symbolic value of brooch pins. Since then, in 2014, President Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom for all of her extraordinary accomplishments, which I know everyone in this room is quite well aware of. Today, I'd like to add one short story that she shared with me when I started at the Rockefeller Foundation. Nearly 70 years ago, when a communist coup occurred in Czechoslovakia and threatened her diplomat father, Joseph Korbel, and his family. A timely grant from the Rockefeller Foundation's Refugee Scholar Program enabled a young 11-year-old young woman and her family to move to Colorado, and her father to become a professor at the University of Denver. It was that experience, as she has written about, of being welcomed here as a refugee and an immigrant, that shaped her passionate belief in the power of democracy and the knowledge that American values and American leadership can lift up people all across the world. Her conviction has touched the lives of so many people, including her colleagues and successors in government, her students at Georgetown, Americans everywhere, and leaders all around our world. And thankfully, she's still actively driving the conversation today. From her effective and important comments about President Trump's refugee ban, which I will let her speak about in more detail if she so chooses, to her recent coaching of Amy Poehler on Parks and Recreation, to those of you that watched that show. I'll just say today, at the end of President Clinton's remarks at the Blum Roundtable, Secretary Albright thanked the president for affording her the opportunity to serve and represent this country all around the world. And I think today, Madeleine, we thank you for taking that mantle of leadership and offering so much of yourself to this place and our world overall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raj. That was very generous, and I can't think of anything better than having you introduce me. It is true, had it not been for the Rockefeller Foundation, we wouldn't have ended up in Colorado. My father was given a job at the University of Denver. We, of course, had no idea where Denver was. My parents bought a car, started driving across America, and my mother said, they say Denver's the mile-high city, but we're not going up, so maybe we're going the wrong direction. But ultimately, she said, there are only two great cities in the world, Prague and Denver. And so very glad to be here. I am delighted to welcome you to the 5th installment of this lecture series, and I'm very pleased to see so many friends here. Those of you who have attended this in the past know that I've been very happy to have something named for me while I'm still around, to act modest about it. But the main reason I always look forward to this event each year is the opportunity to be surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the world of development and health. And this does include two of our past honorees that Peggy mentioned, Raj, who is now president of an incredible foundation, and Mary Robinson, president of the Mary Robinson Foundation for Climate Justice. And there's never an opportunity where Mary does not truly speak about her passion, which is climate. And thank you so much, Mary, for everything that you've done. And are doing. So tonight, we are honored by the presence of another pioneering leader, this year's awardee, the Honorable Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. One of the world's leading development economists, Ngozi spent, this is why we just all call her Ngozi, 25 years at the World Bank, rising to serve as managing director. She served twice as Nigeria's finance minister, most recently from 2011 to 2015, and also served as foreign minister in 2006. She was the first woman to hold both of those positions. Ngozi is currently the chair of the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, Gavi, where she leads one of the most effective life-saving institutions of our time. Gavi has immunized 580 million children globally and has been a key force behind the substantial drop in child mortality over the last decade. Ngozi is also currently chair of the innovative African Union's African Risk Capacity, a promising weather-based insurance mechanism for African countries. and co-chair of the Commission on the New Climate Economy with Lord Nicholas Stern and Paul Pullman. She has championed powerful new approaches to development, calling upon partners to see Africa as a continent of economic strength worthy of more equal partnerships and increased investment. She has called upon world leaders to move from aid to trade and has encouraged businesses and governments to look to the developing world as a place of strong investment returns rather than simply as a recipient of development assistance. In this way, Ngozi's voice has bridged between the worlds of diplomacy and development, showing us the way forward as we move into the new Sustainable Development Goals. So it's my honor to introduce Ngozi, but I also want to add, we are actually very good friends. We have spent a lot of time together, first on the stage at the World Bank, and then in a number of other places in Chicago. And I love talking to her. She is one of the warmest, most remarkable people and is truly an inspiring leader across the world and somebody that I'm so pleased I can introduce here at my favorite place, the Aspen Institute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel absolutely daunted after that introduction. I don't know how I'm going to live up to it, but I'll try. I'm really delighted to be here today, and I'm extremely honored to have received this recognition and been invited to give this year's Madeleine K. Albright Global Development Lecture. I want to thank Peggy Clark, the dynamo, who did everything to make sure that I got here and got here on time. It is really daunting to follow in the footsteps of such esteemed speakers and honorees as Paul Farmer, Helen Clark, Mary Robinson, and Rajiv Shah. I can't fill their shoes. I think Raj wears a size 11 and Mary a size 9, and I'm only size 7, so you can already see that it doesn't fit. But most of all, I want to thank Madeleine Albright. She's an icon. I think that describes it all, not only for women and men here in the US, but all over the globe. She's a household name. She's an inspiration. And she's someone that we all look up to for what she has achieved, what she has done, and what she's yet to do. So thank you, Madeleine, for all you've done and all you've been to us, for the way you've mentored so many people. I also want to thank my family who are here to support me, my long-suffering husband, and I'm going to introduce some interesting members. I want them to stand up because you'll all wonder how they are my family. But Joel and Nicole, Dan and Lorraine and IK, please stand up so people can know that you're my family members. Thank you for being here to encourage me. Tonight, I want to talk about breakthroughs in development. As some of you may know, I've lived most of my life between two great nations. And Nigeria is a great nation in spite of all the problems it's having at the moment. I love it. I've lived between Nigeria and the United States. Both have given me a home, and both are very dear to me. Yet, in so many ways, they couldn't be more different. In coming here tonight, it struck me that despite the enormous differences that exist between these countries in terms of culture, wealth, and resources, some of the greatest challenges they will face in the coming decades will nevertheless be the same. I'm talking about the challenges laid out by the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. Both agreements clearly set out the challenges of the 21st century and beyond, and they provide a universal framework with targets to address these challenges which apply to all nations, The MDGs focused largely on developing nations. Now we have something universal for all nations. It was amazing to me earlier this afternoon when President Clinton was with us, that one of the things he focused on is how to operationalize the Sustainable Development Goals, because he saw this as something bringing the world together, something we can all accomplish together, and something so important. So to me, I think it's the first time in history where our development goals address not just developing nations, but also developed countries. Rich or poor, all nations, we are in it together. To me, this is a pretty significant breakthrough in development thinking itself, to have a frame that involves us all. Now, within this context, it seems clear to me that to solve the challenges facing us, these universal challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals, will require significant breakthroughs. And it is this that I would like to talk about tonight. The breakthroughs for development that I want to talk about center on technology. Despite the potential benefits technology can offer, historically, breakthroughs have often had a negative impact on poor people. Since the Industrial Revolution, if technology wasn't putting people out of work, it was endangering them through hazardous working environments or long-term exposure to pollutants. It is true that technology is still displacing the working poor in many countries, but it is also true that it once would take decades before those at the bottom of the economic ladder could access technology, even though they often had the most to gain. And that is now changing. Today, a global shift is underway that is seeing the quality of life for millions of the poorest people radically improved by breakthroughs in technology. And in some cases, the poor are even the first to benefit. Tonight, I'll talk about some of these technologies. There are many. I won't touch on all of them, but give you some examples of what this means. What is extraordinary is that from this, a fascinating synergy has emerged, because while technology is now helping to drive development, development is also helping to drive technology. This is taking place for two reasons: innovation and scale. The first is that the challenging nature of the development problems we need to solve are such that they require a high level of innovation. Technological innovation is occurring in so many spaces all over the world. This is helping to push the boundaries and lead to genuinely new solutions. The second is scale. Roll out a technology across developing countries and you not only unlock new markets. For the Sustainable Development Goals, it's estimated that there's US $12 trillion of untapped potential for businesses in low-income countries. But also that technology can be put through its paces on a scale that is not normally easy to achieve. Scale is something that I'm particularly focused on as a big development challenge, because we all know how to do good projects and programs, but oftentimes what is lacking is how we scale them to the level that really targets large numbers of poor people in need. So with regard to scale and technology, we have seen what can happen with renewable energy. For decades, investment in wind and solar power has been dwarfed by fossil fuels. But the need for clean off-grid energy and on-grid energy solutions and the energy deficit in poor parts of the world, particularly in Africa, is now spurring development of renewables. It's happening here too and all over the developed world. But I think there's an impetus that is coming also from the needs of development. From solar-powered fridges that are now appearing across Africa to keep medicines and vaccines safe, to Narendra Modi's commitment to generate 40% of India's energy through solar by 2022. New markets are emerging in the South that are helping provide the renewables revolution with a new and much-needed impetus from which we all stand to benefit. Renewable sources of energy currently account for over 22% of global energy production. The figure is projected to reach 26% in 2020, and developing countries will make up 2/3 of this renewable energy expansion. There is an explosion in innovation in renewables and tapping of the off-grid market. I'm the co-chair of a small company called Lumos that has come up with an off-grid solar solution, not the one light bulb, but to power small and medium enterprises and has a mobile payments application. This is so important because it gives businesses in rural and peri-urban areas hope that they can operate sustainably and create jobs. Over 55% of the people on my continent have no access to electricity. Just think about that. So this innovative breakthrough in electricity gives me hope that poor people can be reached at scale and given access to a service capable of truly transforming their lives, enabling children to study at night, welders and carpenters to work, women to leave behind back-breaking household work, and community health workers to store vaccines. Now, when I was the minister, I went to my village, my husband's village, because when you marry in Nigeria, your husband's village becomes yours. So I would go home and they would say my wife. That's what they call me. And the welder in our community, in our village, came to me and said, my wife, you know, you and the people in your government are totally useless. And I said, why? You know, because we're very straight talking in Nigeria. I said, what have we done this time? And he said, look, welding, my work requires electricity. You bring this electricity, today you bring it Monday for 3 hours. Then Wednesday you bring it for 1 hour. Then we don't have it again until Sunday. And he said, how can I make a living? How can I work with this kind of, you're ruining my life. You have to have a solution. So this is a real life thing, to have a solution whereby the welder, I could proudly now go to the village and say to the welder, there is a solution, here it is. And this can enable you to have more stable, more predictable electricity that will enable you do your work. That to me was it. That was someone who could create jobs in the village and make a living for himself and his family. That's the kind of breakthrough in development that people like me and across our continent are looking for. Let me turn to another breakthrough, identity. The need for scaling up innovative solutions for development also applies to identity technology. Currently, in developing countries, 1 in 3 children under the age of 5 does not formally exist because their birth was not registered. This means technically they have no legal status. It is a major problem that can see individuals disenfranchised and denied access to education, health, and the ability to vote. The problem is that in poor countries, the archaic paper-based methods used to certify births, deaths, and marriages makes it too easy for people to slip between the cracks. With 86% of the world's children now getting access to routine immunizations through the work of Gavi and other organizations, more children have vaccination cards than birth certificates. So one solution is to start treating vaccination cards as de facto identity cards. One project called My Child is doing precisely this and attempting to reach even more children by helping countries transition from paper to digital. At first glance, this looks like a typical booklet on which health workers can record health details about the child, such as vaccinations, deworming, or nutritional supplements. But each booklet contains a unique identification number and tear-out slips that are collected and scanned later. This means that even if a child's birth hasn't been registered, a unique digital record will follow them through childhood. Developed by a Swedish startup, Schifo, this system has been used to register more than 95,000 infants in Uganda, Afghanistan, and the Gambia, enabling health workers to follow up either in person or through text reminders to parents. But the biggest identity project of all time is India's Aadhaar biometric ID system. In just 7 years, Nilekani, that's the man in charge of it in India, and his team, I visited them when I was at the World Bank and was amazed at what they were doing. They've been able to cover 90% of India's 1.3 billion population. Using a unique ID number, much like a social security number, and by scanning their finger or iris, this system gives citizens an identity that has opened up the potential for access to services that were previously not available to them. The biometric identity system, which will enable government to restructure and improve its social safety net and subsidy system to better target poor people at scale. It will provide a platform for digital payments, and some are even talking about its use in a universal basic income system. In short, this system provides the opportunity for India to bring development solutions at scale that eradicate poverty. In Nigeria, during my time in government, we saw the opportunity to follow a similar path through the National Identity Card Project in partnership with MasterCard. I wanted to show you my card, but it's in my purse. My husband is holding it. I'll get it later and show you. I'm fascinated by it, and I take my card everywhere because it has a chip from MasterCard. We developed a partnership. And what was this idea? As Minister of Finance, I found that we were so far behind in financial inclusion that having a biometric ID system that could allow poor people to receive government-to-people transfers would help us really push the social safety net we wanted to build and make sure we pick people up from the bottom. It would also enable, with that chip, people to begin to come into the system so that they could be reached with more modern formal financial mechanisms. Of course, such systems still come at a cost. But the beauty about biometrics is that they can more than pay for themselves by helping to prevent or stop corruption. Again, when I first became finance minister in 2003 in Nigeria, my first stint, I was surprised. I'd come from the World Bank where I was a vice president. And I was asked to be Minister of Finance. And I got there and I found that everything we were doing was cash-based. What do I mean? When we needed to pay the Ministry of Agriculture, the equivalent of your Department of Agriculture or Health or whatever, I would transfer my budget and accountant generals, would transfer money, cash to the ministry. And then they would pay their workers. So I asked them, so how many workers do you have? And I got all sorts of numbers. The head of civil service told me one number. The secretary to government told me another number. And I became very worried. Because each month we would get this. And there were varying and unpredictable numbers and payments that we were making. So I went to President Obasanjo at the time. You know, when you're in the World Bank, you're not allowed to work on your country. So I never really realized that this was the type of system we're running until I had to run it. I went to him and I said, this doesn't work. We cannot have the largest country in Africa operating this kind of system, which is open for abuse and corruption. We need to change it. And he agreed. He said, go ahead, do what you need to do to reform the system. So I went to the World Bank, my parent institution, and said, can you help? I went to DFID and USAID and asked them, and all three institutions came and took different parts of this. You see, USAID worked on the budget office. And you know that when I say the terms I'm going to say next, your eyes will glaze over. But it is the kind of institution building that they did that has made it possible for things to be different in finance today. USAID, DFID, the UK agency, and the World Bank. We got about $93 million, $92 million, to help us build an electronic payments platform for the federal government of the country. It's called the Government Integrated Financial Management Information System, GIFMIS. I know your eyes are glazing over. We set up a biometric system to capture and identify all the civil servants. We called it IPIS, the Integrated Personnel and Payroll Information System. And we coupled it with a treasury single account, because I, as finance minister, did not have an overview of all the accounts of government. So how was I going to be able to know what was happening? So these three systems came on this platform and resulted in a stronger financial management system. It took us, I started it, it took us 10 years to be able to build. By the time I left government in 2015, we were able to weed out 65,000 ghost workers. Because what was happening, people were putting in ghost people who didn't exist and collecting their salaries. We weeded out 65,000 ghost workers and we saved the government $1.1 billion. And that's what kind of return is that? On an investment of about $100 million. I think that rate of return is unsurpassable. Do you know that ghost workers used to graduate into ghost pensioners? So people would also collect the pensions of those people. So we also had to extend the biometric system to the pensioners to make sure that this did not happen. Now, ultimately, introducing these kinds of digital ID systems benefits everyone. Using biometrics to include those left out or weed out those who would be corrupt is a social good that benefits us all. The Sustainable Development Goal 16 requires that all 193 member countries of the United Nations, including the US, ensures that everyone has a legal form of identity by 2030, with the aim of helping safeguard the rights of millions of marginalized or disenfranchised people. And you know that in this country, you also have people who have no identity. So you have to meet the goal as well. In light of this, the kind of technology is a necessity if we are to stand a chance of meeting this target. It will make government stronger and more accountable, and it will significantly aid financial and social inclusion. Now, this is especially important for women in developing countries. In many parts of the world, large numbers of women are unable to take control of their finances because they lack basic identity documents, basic documentation even to open a bank account. Globally, 42% of adult women, almost 1 billion people, do not have access, do not have a bank account. Providing women with a digital identity not only helps them to address this gross inequity, it is also plays a very important role in empowering them. When I hear of the fintech financial technology revolution, I'm excited because I'm convinced that the combination of biometrics, mobile phones, and digital payment platforms, when properly applied, can truly empower women and girls, and not only speed them out of poverty, but also set them up to create wealth and create jobs. Look at what is happening with M-Pesa in Kenya, now used by 98% of households. A recent study by Georgetown and MIT professors showed that M-Pesa has helped an estimated 185,000 Kenyan women move from subsistence farming to entrepreneurial activities, thereby lifting their families out of poverty. Just this May, I was in Ahmedabad, and I visited the women of Sewa, the Self-Employed Women's Association, one of the largest in the world. There are 2.5 million of these women, and I so admire what they're doing that I've kept touch with them over. So I visited, and they were telling me about what they're doing with their businesses and the changes they're making. And guess what? They are using M-Pesa payment system in their businesses. I could not believe it. A technology developed in Africa, in Kenya, is now being used in India. And this goes to what Madeleine was saying about me. I want you to think of Africa, when you think about it, not just in terms of the poverty and the disease and the children who need help, but also as a land where young people and old people are doing new things, developing new technologies, trying to stay with the rest of the world. So there are two Africas. The Africa you see, yes, I'm not trying to say we don't have problems and disease and so on and challenges, but we also have things like this happening, technology that is being adopted in other parts of the world. Now let me switch to health. Another technology that is revolutionary for women and one I care deeply about is the Hpv vaccine for girls that prevents cervical cancer. Currently, this disease, horrific disease, kills 266,000 women every year, or roughly 1 every 2 minutes. The vast majority of these deaths, 85%, are in developing countries because they don't have access to screening and treatment, which you have in developed countries. Where it is available, it just costs too much. They can't afford it. But mostly it's not available. Now, if left unchecked, the number of cervical cancer deaths is expected to continue to rise, exceeding maternal deaths and reaching 416,000 by 2035. With the help of new medical technology, the human papilloma virus, HPV vaccine, And thanks to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, of which you heard I'm board chair, our hope is that it won't come to that. With the help of the new technology, just 2 shots of this vaccine provides protection against the virus that is responsible for the vast majority of these cancer cases. Yet up until a few years ago, this vaccine was beyond the reach of women and girls in poor countries. In 2013, Gavi took steps to make the Hpv vaccine available and affordable to the poorest countries at just $4.50 a shot. Here in the US, a single shot can cost more than $100. This has had 2 dramatic effects. First, the response from countries applying for the vaccine has been unprecedented. We can't keep up. Governments were only too aware of the devastating impact that cervical cancer can have on the women, their families, and communities, cutting them down in their most productive years. In addition to this, we also saw the market shift. Previously, poor countries were not viewed by manufacturers as viable markets for this vaccine. But now, 28 countries have introduced the vaccine with support from Gavi. So far, 1 million girls have been vaccinated, saving over 2,000 lives. And our ambition is that over the medium term, we want to vaccinate 40 million girls, saving 90,000 lives. Interestingly, all this has helped to stimulate innovation, which brings us to the other way in which development is driving technology. Hpv vaccination is most effective on girls who have not yet been exposed to the virus. This means they must be vaccinated before becoming sexually active, ideally between the ages of 9 and 13. So unlike most other childhood vaccines which are given to infants, Hpv vaccines require dedicated immunization sessions. And these are now serving as an entirely new platform we are finding for reaching adolescent girls with other health services, such as reproductive education, menstrual hygiene, deworming, nutrition checks, vitamin shots, and other general checkups. In fact, with mosquito season upon us, it's also worth mentioning that if or when a Zika vaccine becomes available, you've all heard of the Zika virus, it will most likely have to be delivered through the HPV platform, as it too will ideally need to be given to girls before they become sexually active. Now let me turn, still on the subject of vaccines and health, to one of my favorite technologies, drones, and give you an interesting example of breakthroughs where development is driving innovation. Originally for military applications, there is now a burgeoning consumer drone market. And we hear of possible pizza delivery and other things by Amazon, although we are yet to see it. But last year, whilst the Federal Aviation Administration here was still scratching its head over drone regulations, the Rwandan government fully embraced the technology and launched the world's first autonomous drone delivery service. And no, it's not for pizzas. In partnership with the US company, Zipline, as well as with Gavi and UPS, this nationwide service was created to deliver medical supplies such as vaccines, blood, etc. across the country. As you all know, Rwanda is very hilly and mountainous, resembling a little bit what we see here. And the cost for building infrastructure to reach all villages is prohibitive. The drone service means that those living in difficult-to-access places can get health services that saves lives at a cost-effective rate for government. With up to 150 deliveries a day, this service allows the Rwandan government to centralize supplies in its capital, Kigali, reducing waste and improving efficiency. For people in remote rural districts in need of blood transfusions or vaccines for their children, the waiting time has been cut dramatically. And this is just the beginning. New drone companies are springing up, developing ever more sophisticated technology for humanitarian applications. This will continue to improve our ability to solve major development challenges in accessing those hardest to reach communities, and in doing so, continue to stimulate innovation in drone technology. And my final one, let me turn global GPS, which we are all familiar with, and talk about its link to big data. This data, or big data to be precise, is transforming development. One of the great frustrations in development has been getting reliable data upon which we can act. But now, by using novel approaches, applying sophisticated data analysis to a very broad range of hyperlocal data sources, there are companies like Frame, which is an 18-month startup in McLean, Virginia, demonstrating that it is possible to find gold in data mines. Using around 200 different data sources, which includes anything from household surveys, which they get from the World Bank and others, to geospatial satellite data, the GPS, Frame's algorithms can identify and cluster a vast range of different types of demographics in developing countries. For example, and I thought we would have some of the slides up for you to be able to see what we're talking about. That's one. This technology has been used. Let's see which one this is. Let me just go through and then I'll come back and explain some of it. Technology has been used in Tanzania and DRC to help an off-grid energy company pinpoint the best locations with the most latent demand for off-grid energy based on population density, proximity of schools, cell phone towers, and households. Similarly, the technology could equally be used to identify different demographics to better target development, whether it's through unemployed men and women in rural areas, pregnant women, unvaccinated children. And while this technology has many commercial applications, which is what they're finding, such as helping Procter & Gamble in Nigeria. Procter & Gamble heard about this, and they've asked them to help them identify areas where mothers are using diapers so they can better target. But the big application is in identifying demographics, which you can now use to target development much better. So Gavi is also using this to help identify areas where it can work with big companies to locate unimmunized children and have access to them. So just what you're seeing here is, I wanted you to see some maps. This one is about, the first one is about childhood stunting. And what it's done is taken in Tanzania a map that locates the very real orange to brown areas. There is where childhood stunting is more than 60%. So instead of government wandering around, they can quickly use this technology to say, okay, our first priority is to go to those geographic areas where the stunting is most important, is worst, and quickly target intervention. And so can donors who want to work on this issue. So you see, by locating this, it really saves time. The next one. The next one is just a map of the Democratic Republic of Congo that shows areas where people can be reached on-grid and off-grid. And what this does is it tries to divide the different policy options you could do. It basically says there are some people who are reachable, who are close to the grid, and it shows where they are, and you can extend the grid. There are others not reachable. You can take renewable type of energies to them. There are others, you can use different interventions to target different types of populations and demographics. The next one. The next one is a map of the Unbanked in Ghana. You know, so the unbanked population, again, as it gets, it shows you scattered around the country where people are. Those who are, the more orange it is, it goes from green down to orange, the worse the unbankedness is. But you can see that scattered all over the country. You can see where people who do not have access to banks or financial services are. Again, this will help you quickly locate those areas and identify them and provide services. And the last one is something done in Nigeria, which is called Generation Bump. This is a map showing banked, urban, mobile, plugged in, hence the bumped, young people in Nigeria. They identified 29 million of them and where they are. So you see the big green lines, they are clustered mostly around the cities. And again, you can use the same technology to identify unplugged in young people, and target them with, actions to create jobs. So that's the last of my illustration of what technology can really help you do to advance development. So let me conclude. Whilst it's true that the greatest challenges of climate and development are in need of technological solutions through scale or innovation or both, it's worth remembering that often this can also be a reciprocal relationship. Tonight, I've just scratched the surface with a few examples. Moving forwards, we're already seeing other breakthroughs in biotechnology, food technology, I could have prevented that, agriculture, rapid diagnostics, and others that can help us solve big problems of improving health, equity, and inclusiveness, creating wealth and eradicating poverty. As Nelson Mandela once said, poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. It seems appropriate then to apply man-made solutions of technology to solve man-made problems. I hope you'll all follow us in supporting these technological breakthroughs. Thank you.
Thank you all. And now we're going to have some time for a bit of a moderated conversation with Ngozi and Madeleine. That was wonderful, Ngozi. Thank you so much. Let me first say we're the blue team up here. And it is really my honor to be sitting with two forces of nature, Ngozi and Madeleine, who have done so much to really better the world. It's amazing. So we'll just have a little bit of a time for a conversation. We were going to try to do some questions from the audience, but I believe we may not have time for that, maybe just one or two. But let me just begin. Our conversation today is about development and diplomacy. So Madeleine, let me start with you. How do you connect development and diplomacy? And when you were Secretary of State, how did issues of the developing world and the kind of issues that Ngozi has described, how did they play out in your daily challenges?
Well, I think we have to remember what kind of a world we're dealing with, where, in fact, there are many countries with a variety of issues that affect their status in the world and also their way of life, which I believe as Americans we should worry about and be concerned about, if for altruistic reasons or the fact that how it affects America. And I think that the issue here is, therefore, what are the tools that can be used in order to make sure that development takes place in faraway places with unpronounceable names? And so the bottom line is, how, in fact, does diplomacy work on that? I teach at Georgetown, and I teach a course, I say, foreign policy is just trying to get some country to do what you want. So what are the tools? The National Security Toolbox does not have a lot of tools in it. Diplomacy, bilateral and multilateral, then economic tools, trade and aid and sanctions, the threat of the use of force, intelligence and law enforcement, that's it. So if you look at the toolbox, a lot of them have to do diplomacy with development. And so I think they do go together, which is why I am concerned about the cuts in the budget that have to do with both diplomacy and development. And I think we have to argue that it is not only important for Nigeria and Africa, the way you've described it, Ngozi, as an incredible opportunity, as well as a responsibility for all of us. And if all of a sudden we decide we're not going to use any of those tools, then we are the losers.
So let's just jump right in. And, you know, the Brookings Blum Roundtable has been looking at this question of where we are with foreign assistance. And I think it was just yesterday when Secretary of State Tillerson ordered the department to redefine the mission of the Department of State and issue new staff mandates around that. And the early drafts took out the reference to democracy. So the combination of that together with these drastic cuts in development assistance, what do you make of that, Madeleine? What do you make of that?
In English?
Yes.
I think it's appalling. I really am stunned because I think, again, Ngozi, as you're talking about what's happened in Nigeria and other countries, the rule of law is important. The capability of people to work with local governments, the villages, that is what democracy is about. And so I find beyond strange that the Secretary of State would even think of saying that. And by the way, I would go to the Hill regularly to beg for money because I never thought that we had enough money. I never thought I would see a moment where the Secretary of State goes to the Hill and says, I like all these cuts, and the members of Congress say, we want to give you more money, and he says, I don't want the money. That is not real. And I think that democracy is the very basis of our country. You can't impose democracy, that's an oxymoron. But you can offer the elements of it to countries, and I do believe, and I think you'd agree with this, Ngozi, that people want to make decisions about their own lives, whether they live in what neighborhood, what jobs they have, where they send their children to school if they can, and that is what democracy is about. So I am stunned.
Ngozi, you shared with us today some of your perspective sitting in Nigeria and also, as you said, being very much a part of America as well. What's your perspective on where the U.S. is right now as far as its role in democracy and development?
Well, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and maybe I will also lapse into my language, Igbo. To say things. But let me say this, for the developing world, there's bemusement, bewilderment, and worry. Those are three sentiments. I think there's bemusement that what was achieved so recently, the world coming together, including the US providing great leadership on the Sustainable Development Goals and climate, is now being questioned. So there's bemusement. What is going on? There's bewilderment because the US is in a leadership position and it seems not to want it. Well, I come from a continent when people get leadership, they don't give it up easily. I tell you. So the fact that here is a leader that everybody looks up to and they're trying to withdraw from it, people are bewildered. And worry about things like values. I said earlier that it's not only about finances when it comes to aid, it's about what America stands for. The fact that we could say, look at the way it's being done over there. Not that America was doing everything right. Don't get me wrong. I lived here and I can say that. But there were certain values that Madeleine referred to. The push for more openness, more transparency, allowing people to express their will through democracy, to choose who their leaders, imperfect as it is. And so the worry that some of those values no longer seem to be so important has a very big impact. So that's my answer: bemusement, bewilderness, and worry.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask both of you, we were honored to have President Clinton speak to our group earlier today, and he expressed some optimism. How would you reflect on his telling us as a group not to be too worried? Madeleine, let me start with you.
Well, I have to say I worked for him, and that is his style, because he really is an optimist and can, in fact, always find the pony in the middle of them. And the bottom line is that I think that we do see opportunities, and I think he was talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and some of the things that both Raj and you said in terms of finding ways to operationalize them, and then seeing, as a result of that, that the entrepreneurial spirit of America and Americans generally can find opportunities where, in fact, the government has not done something. And I do believe that he is fascinated, as am I, and as is Hillary, on public-private partnerships, of how to try to get the private sector, which is composed not only of companies, but of NGOs and individuals, to step in and really push on some of the mandates that are in the Sustainable Development Goals.
Ngozi, how would you respond to that in terms of optimism? And you have famously said that we need to really look afresh at Africa in a different way. You said it again today. What's optimistic to you about this moment in time?
Well, so the flip side of the worry is that there are always some opportunities in every difficult situation. And that opportunity is the ability of developing countries, and in particular my continent, to step back and look seriously at what they can do for themselves. So this is good anyway. And if the present environment is pushing that, I would say that's a good thing. So on the continent, for instance, the AU is going through a reform led by President Kagame. And they're saying, with this kind of atmosphere, instead of relying on people to come and help us fund the way the AU runs, let's look at how we can tax ourselves more and pay for it. And I think that's the right way to go. They are looking more at our own resources. So that's the opportunity I see. So I'm not totally depressed. Let us learn how to do more for ourselves and push us. And our young people, in any case, want to do that.
Good. I can't help but notice how wonderful it is that we are a panel of women, the opposite of a manel, up here today on the stage, which is lovely. And both Secretary Albright and Ngozi are heroes of mine. So you're both firsts. You were the first female Secretary of State. Ngozi, you were the first female finance minister of Nigeria, and then the first female foreign minister. When you were growing up and beginning your work, did you imagine that you would be the one that broke the glass ceiling?
Never occurred to me.
Never.
All I wanted to be was an American and to have the opportunities that this country offered, but it never occurred to me. And so I am very grateful for that. And I know that I wouldn't have been Secretary of State if it hadn't been for Hillary. And the reason I know that is because President Clinton said so publicly.
Well, we're really glad that he did. And Ngozi.
Well, I never set out to work in government. I thought I was going to be an academic. And that's why I got a PhD, because I thought I was going to be a university lecturer. And that would be another way of giving back. Then I went into the World Bank, and I thought, okay, my parents had always insisted on giving back to your country in one way or the other. You are never comfortable, no matter what you're doing, when there are others in your village who are uncomfortable. That was what they taught us. So then I was called, and my father said to me, this is another way of giving service. And, so that's why I went in. And I also should say that President Obasanjo gave the opportunity to appoint the first. It was very controversial. And in President Jonathan's government, extremely controversial, because he took the number of women from 16% to 32% in cabinet. And people didn't like it. So
I have to add to that, it was pretty controversial when my name came up, and it was clear that women could not be secretaries of state, is what we were told. And then, about 7 years ago, my youngest granddaughter, her mother is here, said, she's here, Ellie, said, so what's the big deal about Grandma Maddie being Secretary of State? Only girls are Secretary of State. And in her time, that was true.
Yay, beautiful. Beautiful. Ngozi, we're so honored to have you accept this award, and it is important to note that you're the first person from the developing world that's accepted this award so far. And I think the purpose of development assistance is kind of to work yourself out of a job. In its best self, it is supporting countries to do on their own and to lead on their own. And you talked about leadership. But I think it's safe to say that there aren't that many leaders like you in the developing world. We just have Minister Tedros, who's the new Director General of the WHO. When Raj was head of USAID, he spent a lot of time thinking about this issue of country ownership. What are we not getting right? I think you are one of the few that's maybe challenged that power dynamic in the development frame. What would be your advice to us about how we can support more youth?
I think I'm going to be very blunt, because at the World Bank I used to be a little bit controversial. I didn't know if Omi was here and saying some of these things. I think that sometimes the dynamics of power and relationships and who is doing what in these countries is not well understood. It is when you come in to do development, you really need that fundamental community-based, hard-nosed understanding of what's going on to be able to pick out who are the people who are truly doing well and whom we should support, and who are those who are not. In many countries, very often, it is those who are doing the wrong things who get the bully pulpit and get the support. And there are many me's. I'm not unique. There are many me's. I'm just lucky that I was put in positions and I worked hard. You know, when I was finance minister, the women always wanted to meet with me, and I would never have time, and they would be upset. And then one day I told them, this is a breakthrough for women. The biggest thing I can do to get the next person, finance minister or foreign minister, woman, is to work so hard that the men will never have a chance. So don't worry if you don't see me, I'm working. And there are many me's. Guess what? They were able to identify more women to fill those positions in other ministries that had never been filled. So it is getting information right about what is happening in the atmosphere and who is who, and then supporting those people. You've done it in many ways. That's the soft power. Sometimes you've used the diplomacy and the various instruments to bring people, and it will be a shame if that goes away. So if you identify the wrong people and you can support them in place or bring them out where they can see different ways of doing things, that would really be good.
Excellent, good. So I want to bring, before we close, and unfortunately we're out of time, another great heroine of the Aspen Institute, Governor Ann Richards, said, if I had known I didn't have more time, I would have raised more hell. So let me be the first to say, and I invite all of you to give a round of applause for Madeleine and Ngozi, who have forcefully given hell in so many of the right places and who are really paving the way for so many of us. So thank you very much.